We made clear, and I made in my personal conversations, which have been many, with President Xi, that we seek competition, not conflict. But I will make no apologies that we're investing to make America stronger, investing in American innovation and industries that will define the future that China intends to be dominating.
Somewhat of a tepid response from President Biden when it comes to China. You can see the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, looking there as well. But China says those comments smeared them. The president's comments during the State of the Union, focusing mainly on how prepared the U.S. is while also trying to avoid conflict. The president mentioned China and President Xi Jinping at least 7 times in that speech. Some say it was not enough. Officials in Beijing today are firing back. They say they do not fear competing with the U.S., but is, quote, opposed to defining the entire China-U.S. relationship in terms of competition. That is, of course, what they say externally. A much different conversation plays out internally in Beijing. They also have said it will defend its interests and the U.S. should work with them to, quote, promote the return of bilateral relations to a track of sound and stable development. The comments come, of course, amid the backdrop of this Chinese spy balloon that floated over most of mainland America just last week. Joining us now for more on this is Gordon Chang. He's the author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War. Great to see you, Gordon.
Hey, Gordon.
Thanks, guys.
Always kind of just playing, footsie with the Chinese, rhetorically speaking, of course. Gordon, on a grading scale for the State of the Union, how would you grade President Biden's response to China and the balloon? I mean, obviously other issues at play as well. A being a high grade, F obviously being a failing grade. What do you give them?
Well, with regard to the balloon, that would be a D. And the problem here is that the question is, when was the president notified of this balloon? Now, President Biden said it was Wednesday or Tuesday. If it were Tuesday, that would have been the 4th day after it entered territorial U.S. airspace. And that means the failure is going to be that of the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Some people say that the administration is not telling the truth and that the president knew from the get-go. And if that's indeed the case, then it certainly is a D-.
Yeah, we can't seem to get, some transparency on these facts, as you mentioned. And then there was, the report that came out that, this happened during Trump's administration, and Trump's higher-ups are like, no, we don't think so. Specifically today, there's this new report also, Gordon, that the Pentagon is confirming that China has now declined a phone call from U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. He put in the initial request to the Chinese defense minister on Saturday, right after the balloon was shot down. Of course, America watched that. Beijing called the shooting down of the balloon an obvious overreaction. So what do you take from this report that they don't want to pick up the phone, they don't want to have this call? Is this something that we can infer some strategy moving ahead now on what they may be doing in light of what we saw last week?
Yeah, the Chinese are masters at not talking. And then what they do is they create the ardent suitor phenomena that we then pursue them more and more because they won't talk to us. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin should not have placed that call in the first place for 2 reasons. First of all, the Chinese should be calling us. But second of all, and we Americans forget this, the defense minister of China, whom Lloyd Austin tried to call, is a junior official in the Chinese system. His comparable rank in China is actually Xi Jinping, who is chairman of the Central Military Commission. So the Chinese take great delight where we have our senior officials try to talk to their junior officials, and they rebuff us or they humiliate us in some way. So this just shows the failure of Americans to think about the way we deal with China. We shouldn't be talking to them. We should be trying to scare them by not talking to them. And anyone who has ever raised a 3-year-old knows that you have to sometimes impose costs, and the Biden administration doesn't want to do that.
Gordon, a new poll shows that almost 60% of voters disapprove of President Biden's handling of this Chinese balloon crisis. I don't know if that got any higher based on what we heard last night. I doubt it. They also say it makes America look weak on the global stage. And that's just a fact. I mean, 60% of America feels that way, and it's easy to understand why.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk to the 40% and explain why they actually think that's a good idea, what the president did. Because really, Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, may have had a number of objectives here, but one of them was to humiliate the United States and to show to the world that the United States was incapable of defending its own airspace and that the Chinese were free to survey the most sensitive sites in the U.S. And in that sense, the Chinese accomplished what they set out to do. So I think D- is actually a pretty high grade when you start to put things in that light.
Well, we know you're trying to be as objective as possible, Gordon, when you give that grade, maybe grading on a bit of a curve as well. We appreciate your time. Gordon Chang, as always. Thank you.